from the AIA Historic Resources Committee, HAB's Knowledge Group, of which I'm the chair, and we're grateful to our host, the Association for Preservation Technology. My name is Leslie Gilmore. I'm going to do everything backwards, apparently. This is Robert Arzola from the National Park Service's HAB staff. This is the first event following a formal agreement between APT, HABs, AIA, and the Athenaeum of Philadelphia to host the prize awards 2 out of 3 years when the APT conference is in the U.S. We are very grateful to APT for your support. This HABS Peterson competition helps to hone observation and drawing skills, training the next generation of preservationists and architecture practitioners. Likewise, participation encourages sensitivity to historic resources while also providing a substantial and meaningful addition to the HABS collection. The submissions are meaningful to us because they help HABs to fulfill one of the most crucial mandates, and that is the documentation of the full range of building types and styles through our own recording efforts. Neither HABs chief Catherine Lavoie nor Peterson Prize coordinator and HABs architect Mike Shara are able to join us this year, but they both send their sincere congratulations. HABs architect Robert Arzola is here to help present the awards, and he has a few words to say as well.
Good evening. Nice to see everyone. My name is Robert Arzola, and I'm one of the HABs architects. I manage a different prize, but since Mark Shara is out in Scandinavia now, I got to come here and meet everybody and meet the winners of the Peterson Prize. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Peterson Prize is an annual competition that is awarded to students who submit a comprehensive set of HABs drawings to the collection. This is also the first year that it's not just HABs drawings, but the competition is now also open to sites that would normally qualify for the Historic American Engineering Record and also the Historic American Landscapes Survey. So the competition is, in fact, getting broader. The competition was started in 1983 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the HABs program, and it is named after Charles Peterson, who is one of the founders of the HABs program and also of APT. These are some interesting statistics. In the 36 years of the competition, there have been 74 various programs that have entered into the competition. 48 of those programs have received at least one award. Now, there have also been 667 projects submitted through the Peterson Prize, and that has a participation of approximately 4,000 individuals. So those are really interesting numbers. The total number of sheets that have been donated to the collection through the Peterson Prize is almost 7,000, which is approximately 10% of the entire HABs collection. Also, right, those are really great. Those are really, really great numbers. Also, there has been almost $197,000 of prize money that has been awarded during these past 36 years. So it's a really great competition, and I think we should go ahead and announce the winners.
Okay, Robert. As we announce the awards, could the students and their instructors please come forward to receive your awards? And one student will have been selected, we hope you figured it all out, to talk a little bit about your project, and then we will take photographs of you as well. Now, the plus, besides getting your certificate, is that you're getting a signed copy of Recording Historic Structures. John Burns, the author, is in the audience, and he was kind enough to sign multiple copies of these. So, without further ado, thank you. Great. In third place, Louisiana Tech University School of Design. The instructor is Guy Carwile, who could not come this evening, but I understand that Stevens White is here to accept the award. Great. Okay. But he was joined by, you can keep coming, sorry. He was joined by a team of Michael Davis, Marta Munn, and Edward Nieto, and Lane Walters. Congratulations, Stevens White.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Here's your award, and I also have this other package here for you.
Oh, thank you.
The award check is in there, and we have another.
And here's your book.
Oh,
and
thank
before
you.
you say a few words, we're going to move you over here.
Wherever you want me.
So, wait,
you would hold
where?
the,
Where do you want him?
Does this work?
Okay, we'll get it figured
right.
out by the time the last one's up here.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Do you want to say a few words?
Sure.
That would be great. Thank you.
I just thought that this program was great because we got to go out into the field and see the difference between AutoCAD and the studio space and what's in the real world, because when we took all these measurements and stuff isn't working out right, we get to go out there and find out that this house, even though it was built just in the 50s, wasn't square at all. So you get to see just how the real world works. And it was a great experience, and I'm glad we got to do it. Thank you.
Great. Congratulations.
That's why we love diagonal dimensions. All right, now second place is Ball State University Department of Architecture instructor Jonathan Spodek, FAIA, who is here. And he has a student team, Caitlin Barhorst, Ashley Danielson, Megan Heinrich, Alyssa Reynolds, and Gwen Stricker. So one of you, it must be Gwen. No, let's see. Oh, no, I don't know. Which one of you isn't here? Caitlin. Okay. All right.
We'll do it this way. Congratulations to all of you guys, or ladies. You look very familiar. Thank you. Hi there.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. I'll put this up here. Oh, we're gonna do a photo. Maybe we should move to this side. A little bit.
Okay. And one of you.
We're going to do a picture first.
Oh, okay. Wait, yes, the photo first. Right?
It's okay. Just try to be helpful.
Great. You're the selected one? Great.
Yes, I am the selected one. Okay. First of all, we would like to thank the Peterson Prize Selection Committee for selecting our project to receive an award, and our advisor, Jonathan Spodek, for guiding the development of the project throughout the semester. Our survey submission documents Public Schoolhouse Number 1, which is also known as Southgate Schoolhouse in the more local realm. It's an Italianate schoolhouse in Franklin County, Indiana. And it's a property that's representative of the history of the rural Midwest educational system. And throughout the semester, we really got to know this little tiny building inside and out. As a group, we collectively measured the building in the very dead of winter, conducted research on the historical context, and drafted our set of drawings following the HAB standards. Throughout the project, we learned that it was most evident that we did not only learn a lot from the HAB's documentation process and the expertise of Jonathan, but we also learned a great deal from each other and our own interests and backgrounds. So that's really what we gained from this project. And so we're thankful that it's run every year, and we really got a lot out of it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for the certificate.
Thank
All
you.
right, sure. Thank you, guys.
Before we announce the first prize winner, I would like to note that all of these students are here at the behest of APT, who is covering their conference registration. And the AIA Historic Resources Committee is reimbursing them for the travel expenses. So we have a lot of support for these students, and we really encourage all of you to encourage more students to have these great experiences and bring them to the fore and into their professional lives. The suspense is waiting. First place, the formal office section of icon American architect Frank Lloyd Wright's Telly Essen West in Scottsdale, Arizona. Sue Ann Pemberton, instructor. Pablo Chavez, Miles Dabry. This is a great screen. Angela Garcia, John Michael Gonzalez, who is here with his parents. Aaron Jarrett, Jingchi Lee, Fernando Morales. So, would you like to come up? Great.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And here's your book. And then Sue Ann gets 6 more.
6 more books.
Good luck taking them home. Would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Okay. Do you mind holding this? Hello, I'm John Gonzalez, and we worked on Taliesin West's formal office. And I'd just like to say one thing. This was my very first surveyed measure drawing course and building that I've ever worked on. And it was probably the most eye-opening experience I've ever had. So much so that I actually started to take courses for getting a certificate for historic preservation. Yes. So, in doing all this work, my professor, Pemberton, she gave us instructions on what to do and, gave us all the tools and equipment to use to be hands-on with the experience and not just getting a digital image and going back into our classrooms and using AutoCAD or whatever. So we wanted to do this all hands-on, and I thought, this would probably be kind of easy, I think. But the weeks go by, and the more and more work we have to do and do and do. But to tell you this, that I actually enjoyed doing all that work, and I didn't mind all that hard work. So to get first place, the Peterson Prize, is a great achievement for me and for our school. I want to thank my parents for being here. They were excited as well. And I want to thank Professor Pemberton for always being there for for all the hard times. She's a great professor. She's a great person, and I love her. So thank you to APT. Thank you for the Peterson Prize, and thank you guys.
Did you get your picture?
Here, hold on, let me hand this to you guys. Just them or the whole group?
Let's do one with him and his professor.
Okay.
Okay.
2 shots. 1, 2, 3. Last one. 1, 2, and nice.
That was got my name on it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You native of San Antonio?
No, but
I am.
I'll take them.
All
I'll
right.
just take them with me now.
oh no.
They can fight over who gets to take the books home. We also want to note that there were 2 honorable mentions this year. The log infill barn in Bozeman, Montana, drawn by students by MSU at MSU, Mara O'Neill Conrad as their instructor, and also Casa Sorales, Ponce, Puerto Rico, Pontifical Catholic University, Magda Bardina and Roberto Garcia instructors. Thanks to all the students and professors for all their hard work. Very nice. Thank you. The photographer is trying to gather all of the students and instructors so that we can do a group photograph since we have some time.
Welcome to the College of Fellows Keynote and Induction.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the College of Fellows induction ceremony. My name is Steve Kelly, and I'm a fella, and I'm glad to be here tonight. The College of Fellows fulfills a variety of significant functions within APT. The college advises the board of directors on issues regarding the advancement and philosophy and practice of preservation technology. The college provides the College of Fellows keynote lecture each year, which is the main reason that we are here this evening. The college also provides the roundtable debate and discussion, which will take place on Wednesday at 10:30 in the Delaware Room upstairs. The college honors those APT members who have provided valuable services to the preservation field and to APT. Each year at this venue, the College of Fellows inducts new members. The College of Fellows jury, which consists of Pamela Jerome, Dan Worth, Richard Renaud, and Christine Wallace, and that's what the committee was made up of. It is my honor to announce the 2018 class of APT College of Fellows. And I would like to invite APT President Kitty Veith to join me on the stage for this ceremony. So, Kitty, come on up. Our first inductee is Barbara Campagna. Surprise, surprise. Barbara Campagna gives generously of her time and energy, shares and develops knowledge in the areas of sustainability and modern architecture preservation, educates and mentors the younger generation, and is someone who has had a positive and lasting impact on the association. During her stellar career, Barbara has put effort into mentoring and promoting colleagues, and this desire to share and collaborate is a fundamental part of APT's culture and a part of Barbara's DNA. Her tenure with the General Services Administration as a Regional Historic Preservation Officer and the National Trust for Historic Preservation as the Graham Gund Architect served both to benefit the preservation of some of the country's most significant structures, including federal courthouses and modern icons like the Farnsworth House, and as a national platform for two of her passions, sustainability and modern heritage. Barbara has served many roles as a member of the New York City chapter of the AIA Historic Resources Committee. She contributed to commentary on projects before the Landmarks Commission and on preservation issues. She helped with the symposium on the Secretary of the Interior Standards. She served on the board of Columbia's Preservation Alumni. She served as president of the APT New York chapter. She has published and delivered papers and organized symposia extensively on preservation, modern heritage, and sustainability. She founded APT's Technical Committee on Modern Heritage in 2006, and as president was a staunch supporter of the Technical Committee on Sustainable Preservation, bringing them into the national dialogue on sustainability policy with the National Trust and the U.S. Green Building Council, which led to APT's receipt of the AIA Collaboration Award. In 2007, Barbara became president of APT. She led the executive committee through the selection of an APT administrative director and the transition to the new administrative team that we have now. During this process, she redefined the way APT did its business. Barbara started an endowment for the organization, and if you know Barbara, you know that she has no qualms about asking for money for APT. In 1 year as past president, she raised approximately $100,000 essentially on her own. She has taken on the role of chair of APT's 50th anniversary conference here in APT Buffalo-Niagara 2018. She is quite a presence here at the conference, and if you do not know her, perhaps this week will be your opportunity to meet her. It is my distinct honor and privilege to invite her up here and announce the elevation of Barbara Campagna to the Association for Preservation Technology College of Fellows, class of 2018. Wait a minute. We're going to pin you first.
Okay. We said maybe we would just give you the pin, and you could choose to put it on as you like. So.
Okay. Yeah. The pin's down there somewhere. This is a good gig. Janet Knoll. Janet Knoll is a long-term member of the Board of Directors of the APT Northeast Chapter. Janet single-handedly designed and coordinated 3 training programs on new topics, including the unique material challenges faced by the historic resources within New York's 6 million-acre Adirondack Park. Janet recently accomplished an extraordinary feat: publication of the 2017 guidebook of the Adirondack Architecture Guide, Southern Central Region. And she has committed to 2 more editions of the guidebook to document this immense and significant region. Janet's understanding of the critical need to train future generations of preservation practitioners took form in the early 1980s, when she promoted the addition of historic preservation education to curriculum within the traditional architecture program at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. The focus on knowledge and training reflects her vision of the ongoing learning required to practice preservation. Janet has attended 12 APT training courses, and at most conferences she has taken time to attend optional training opportunities and tours. Janet is absolutely dedicated to APT's training programs and to the Bulletin, for which she has provided multiple contributions as an author and peer reviewer. The supporters of this nomination, who served on the APT and also the APT Northeast Chapter boards with her, have universally noted the mark that Janet's clarity and perspective have had on our organization's core programs. During Janet's 5-year service as co-chair of the Training and Education Committee, she helped redefine the content and method of delivery of APT's training programs. These programs have experienced marked increases in attendance at conferences and chapter events, and consequently strengthened the overall health of APT. In both her training-related efforts and commitment to the next generation of APT members, Janet has had a significant impact on preservation in New York State, on APT, and on the APT Northeast Chapter. She is a consummate and devoted professional and a role model for others. It is our sincere wish that Janet will continue her efforts in support of APT and the chapters, as well as engage in new efforts to promote and advance the College of Fellows. It is my distinct honor and privilege to announce the elevation of Janet Knoll to the Association for Preservation Technology College of Fellows, Class of 2018. Janet? We'll pin you first.
Okay.
Let's get our picture taken.
Okay. Come out
Let's
from
go
behind the
that way.
podium.
Go that way a little bit. Okay.
There you go. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful.
Please.
Well, since Steve asked the question, I need to answer it. Almost 40 years ago, 1979, Brown Palace Hotel, Denver, Colorado, my first APT conference. A light bulb went off in my head. APT was even then, in my view, the peer professional organization for preservationists in North America. Yes. And not only that, it was an incredible network of people sharing expertise, friendship, knowledge, and particularly lessons learned, our mistakes. In my view, it remains, and even more so today, is that important organization. And the answer to your question is, as long as I can walk and talk, I'll be with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to invite Nan Gutterman to the stage.
So it gives me great pleasure to do the introduction of the College of Fellows presentation for this evening. Randall Mason plays several roles at Penn School of Design, Associate Professor of City and Regional Planning, Senior Fellow at Penn Praxis, and until recently, he serves as the Chair of the Graduate Program in Historic Preservation. Educated in Geography, History, and Urban Planning, his published works include The Once and Future New York, winner of the SAH Antoinette Forrester Downing Award. Before arriving at Penn in 2004, he taught at University of Maryland and RISD. Mason's professional work includes projects at many scales addressing preservation, planning, and public space issues, commissioned by organizations including the Getty, William Penn Foundation, Brookings Institute, the City of Philadelphia, and the National Park Service. He lives in Philadelphia, has an honorary doctorate from the University of Gothenburg, and was a Rome Prize Fellow at the American Academy in Rome, 2012 to 2013. Before I invite Randall to the podium, I want to just point out the learning objectives of this talk. I'm not going to read them because everyone's able to read, so I'm going to go next slide. These are our sponsors. Randy? Next. We're good? Thanks. So Randy, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Nan. How's everybody doing tonight? Great. I want to ask you, but I don't want you to spill your drinks. I see several people with drinks in your hand in the audience. And, let me get directly to the. Before I get directly to the talk, I wanted to express my real appreciation to Nan and Barbara and others on the committee for the invitation. It's a real honor. I'm very, very aware of the great work that APT and all of its members do in service to the field. And I'm ashamed to say that this is my first APT conference, but I promise it won't be my last. Slight hisses. I'm also appreciative for in discussing the invitation, the committee suggested that I talk about the subject, the Rwandan genocide memorials for this evening, which I appreciate, among other reasons, because this is very much a work in progress. It's been a long-term project that will continue on for a number of years. And so it's always a little bit hazardous, but a great educational experience for me to talk about work in progress. So I'm really eager to both tell you about it and also to hear your questions. And apropos the learning objectives that you saw a minute ago, I think it's incumbent on me to say that there will not be an exam, but hopefully there will be some learning. Great. So stories about the Rwandan genocide typically start in one of two ways. On one hand, one hears stories about the day of April 6, 1994, when the president of Rwanda's airplane, President Habyarimana, was shot down over Kigali, by many accounts precipitating a genocide that went on for months and resulted in the death of a great number of Rwandans. Many of them Tutsi, from the Tutsi group within the country. This is a pretty misleading story. Of course, it has the kernel of truth to it, but the genocide itself was actually a much more deeply seated, much more of a slow burn, in a way planned disaster. So there are another set of stories, another set of stories that you may have already heard. And these usually start with, from the perspective of an individual person, an individual Rwandan. And they usually have a very deep tone of melancholy, and it's about the direct witness of the violence of the genocide, people watching their families perish before them. And these two are essential truths but also partial truths in the sense that we have to try to understand this phenomenon, or one has to try to understand this phenomenon both at this personal, visceral level, literally through the eyes of Rwandans, but also at a larger political, cultural, social, even global level. So a lot of people have written a lot of great books about the Rwandan genocide of 1994, and I won't say much more about all those books other than to show you a few examples of them. I think the one fact that I'll cite that most of these books do pick up on, and it's not a demonstrated fact, but it is a consensus, that in 100 days between April and August of 1994, 800,000 Rwandans were killed, often killed by hand, and often killed by their neighbors, and in some cases, they're people who they knew very well. So how do the memorials fit into this? To me, this project of working on the conservation of places that have already been acknowledged by the Rwandans as the appropriate memorial sites for this incredibly significant part of their history, they're an incredibly important entry point for both Rwandans and outsiders to understand how these larger historical, social, and cultural and political issues, the sort of broad stroke causes, quote unquote, of the genocide, how those get squared with the intimate, personal violence and experience of the people who actually went through it. So through the combination of through the sort of construction of these memorials in both literal and metaphorical senses, the Rwandans have done, I think, incredible work both for themselves but also for the rest of us. And they've created ways through these complex sites of I won't say experiencing the genocide, but certainly understanding it at a deeper level. And I think we can all benefit by trying to understand these kinds of cultural traumas at a deeper level. The sites themselves, which I'll show you one in quite a bit of detail later, but I'll do a quick survey in a minute. These sites are asked to do a lot. They are, as I'll repeat at the end of as a learning point at the end of the talk, these sites of traumatic heritage have two really distinct missions to serve as an archive of the history of what happened, in very direct and graphic ways, but also to serve as an agent for social change within their societies and often outside their societies. They're not just presented as passive bits of evidence. They're actively promoted and deployed and debated as ways to reform and change and sometimes protect the societies themselves. With all of that freighted onto these memorials, and as you'll see, there are a small number of them have been sort of identified as the ones of national importance, the people who take care of these places have a great deal on their shoulders. And this gentleman, his name is Martin Muhoza, has been involved in the conservation and protection of Rwandan genocide memorial sites since 1994. He's pictured here at a site you'll see a lot later, Nyamata, where members of his own family met their end. And he is he works for the Rwandan government, and he's essentially the one who's principally responsible for dealing with the future existence of these sites, which is to say their conservation. So I do want to acknowledge that there are a great number of resources to learn about the Rwandan genocide memorials, and beside the memorials, there are incredible archives that have been built by the government with partners like the Aegis Trust, which is a UK-based philanthropy, to build websites that have access to personal testimonies, to documents, and so forth. The memorials themselves, though, will be my exclusive focus. And this is a page from the website of the Rwandan Genocide Memorial, in the main one in Kigali. And I just wanted to leave this here as a sampling but to generally describe the kind of the collection, if you will, of memorial sites that Rwandans have constructed. There are many of them all over the country, dozens of them, if not hundreds. The government has decided to create 8 national memorials that essentially will be the official centralized places where incidentally outsiders would go to learn about the genocide, but more importantly that they would be focuses of education, commemoration, and political and cultural kind of activity within the country. So the centralization and government control over these is a very important aspect of their conservation. I want to take a brief aside at this point to just sort of let everyone know that over the course of this presentation, there will occasionally be pictures of the memorials that are fairly graphic in nature. I purposefully tried to cut back on the number and the directness of those, but part of every one of the national memorials are collections of human remains, principally bones, and also collections of personal artifacts that belong to the victims and are retained on the site and displayed, and as you'll see, present really, really difficult conservation problems. So as I've said, I've tried to minimize those, but if you, I apologize in advance if there's any kind of upset about that. So the national memorials are all complexes of buildings and sites. They all have collections. Most of them, but not all of them, are adapted from sites where the actual killings took place. The main one in Kigali that most people go to actually was not. They are deployed all over the country. It's a relatively small, very dense country. They've all evolved a great deal over 20 plus years since the genocide happened. They've been transformed and modernized, improved, and in some cases degraded in various ways over the years. So there's a lot of change has taken place. They're managed in a way that is kind of wonderfully, at the same time, uncurated, but also really carefully scripted. So the understanding how the kind of the narrative interpretation squares with the state of the artifacts and collections and sites is one of the kind of the vexing things about the places. They're often very graphic and very direct in their presentation of what is called, quote, evidence of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, close quote, which is the official description of the events. They are meant to serve survivors principally, but also to instill empathy in us outsiders. And they're presented as evidence, and this is the kind of the most recent kind of significance that they've gained, evidence of the country's recovery and resilience since 1994, which is, and by any measure, absolutely astounding. Whether one can't imagine what happened in 1994 and then a country that today is thriving economically, advancing socially and technically in various ways, and public health measures and so forth and so on. It's not without controversy, and I don't want to suggest that. There are still many controversial aspects of Rwandan development in the last 24 years. But they really represent a really kind of remarkable achievement. The gist of my talk is to of course, talk about conservation, which is our work has been principally but not exclusively focused on this one site called Nyamata. You'll see that the textile conservation has been a really important part of this. I also want to make sure that we have a chance at the end, and this is one of my own projects with this project, to raise some of the larger issues and the research questions that not only the Rwandan Genocide Memorials raise, but also other kind of traumatic heritage places. The thesis, if you will, that I'm in the course of working on is that these places are not significant just in and of themselves as experiences, as archives, but also because they help us reflect on our practices in such a way to really foreground the importance of integrating all of the different kinds of work that we do, technical work, design work, managerial work, and so on. But also to do it under conditions of really great urgency. Urgency in the sense of the deterioration of the sites and their collections, but also urgency in a societal sense, that the creation and sustaining of these memorials is really a very important political and social issue for the whole country. By analogy, I won't talk much more about these other than to really sort of show you just a brief provocation, if you will, that traumatic heritage places are an important type that has emerged over the last few years. And here are two examples that are much closer to home of sites that are very important heritage sites in terms of heritage values and the social values that happen at sites, but also have taken on really important societal projects, again, serving as agents for change as well as archives of what has happened. And I've had the privilege of working in different ways with both of these sites. Of course, this work never happens independently, and the work that I'm presenting today is my own view of it, but I've done it with a fantastic team of people. You may know a number of them, particularly Michael Henry and Julia Brennan, both experts, a great deal of experience in their own right on building and systems conservation with Michael and Julia as a textile conservator. A number of other team members that I wanted to make sure to acknowledge from the start. The privilege and the challenge of working on these multi-skilled teams is again one of the important things that I wanted to convey throughout all this work. But all the work, all the different kinds of work that we have done, whether it's the training work, the direct conservation work, the planning and decision-making guidance that we do with the Rwandans, has all been framed by this what I've come to think about as the fugitive nature of these heritage places that we otherwise think of as kind of very sort of, they're hard and fast. We can put our hands on them, we can protect them, but the meaning of them and the use of them in society seems like such an evanescent thing, such a difficult thing to track and to understand and to manage, that it always seems like I'm reminded of a really great book I read in grad school in which the historian Peter Novick tried to describe, he created a metaphor for describing what objectivity is. And he said objectivity is like nailing jelly to the wall. A vivid metaphor, and I feel that in working with these places, in the sense that the sort of fixities that we usually reach for in conservation don't really serve the real purposes that we're going for. So the work that we've done for the last 5 years, and our funding was actually just renewed to keep working on it for another year or two, has been funded by, supported with by the Rwandan government. We work directly with an organization called CNLG. It's a French acronym for the National Commission for the Fight Against Genocide, a particular government department specifically created to manage commemoration, including the memorials. We've had the support of the Department of State, of Aegis Trust, Sharon Davis, a New York architect, and her philanthropy, as well as my school. And I'll go through these just very quickly, but or maybe just leave these aside. But as a teacher of preservation theory, I have to always be kind of explicit about the theoretical ideas underpinning all of this work. And I'll only pause to say that apropos the different kinds of challenges that we face, technical, design, interpretive, managerial, that we have to draw on a lot of the foundational ideas that we I think all have lingering in the back of our heads. Some of them quite new to the field, things like authorized heritage discourse and the questioning of international best practice, I think, is a very important challenge to the politics of the work that we do. But we've drawn on lots of different both technical expertise and as well as philosophical questioning as we've gone through this work. First project that we did in 2014 was a very quick study of a place called Narama Genocide Memorial, which I won't talk about in the interest of time, but it's in the same region as Nyamata. And the region is called Bugesera. It's about 30 kilometers. This site is about 30 kilometers south of Kigali, the capital. It's an area where Tutsi were exiled in the 1950s, which was one of the parts of the beginning of the genocide, stretches back decades, if not a century, to the colonial era, where the Tutsi were marginalized, discriminated against, exiled internally, as well as killed and attacked in smaller numbers than in 1994. But it's an important context to this place. The kind of work that we did included training CNLG to do the work themselves and to acquire greater capacity to do the conservation work. We used Nyamata as the focus of the training and also implementation, and went through. We've tried to go through what we all understand as kind of typical methodology of documentation, diagnosis, planning, treatment, and implementation. We also have tried to package that, even though we didn't have the time or the resources to do this at the very beginning of the project, as a conservation management plan that we've been developing over time that they can continue to work on over the years. So Nyamata is a little market town, again, distant from the capital and pretty remote up until the turn of the 21st century. This is a picture of it from the air, and I'm not sure if I have a clicker. I have a clicker, but not a pointer, I think. But you can see the central building in this slide is the church, or the former church. It is a complex now ringed by a fence just off the main highway, and in very typical fabric of the Rwandan countryside and Rwandan small towns. You see laterite roads everywhere, a number of small one-story informal buildings. These are schools and religious buildings mostly in this view. The building at the center of this project, the church or the sanctuary as I'll refer to it, was designed in about 1980 by a Swiss architect and priest named Bernard Jobin. He spent years in this part of East Africa designing these really wonderful buildings that are at once very much of the site, using typical local materials, all passive ventilation and lighting, as well as repeated references to his hero, Corbusier. So it's an incredibly complex building. I won't say anything more about it now, except to note on the plan on the right, you'll notice that the basic volume of the sanctuary is pulled apart at 3 places in plan to introduce these ventilation slots that are covered with concrete screens, a really important feature of the building. This is a kind of just an abstracted plan of the site. You can see the church in the center. There's a mass grave structure behind it. It's another feature of all Rwandan memorials, as well as a number of other service buildings. The construction is basic load-bearing masonry, brick construction with locally made bricks and concrete mortar, but on a concrete foundation. These are the concrete screens that are locally called costras. That, as you can see, are piled full of laterite road dust, which is one of the big conservation issues. This is a photograph from 2007 of the church, and you can see not only the concrete screens that you see up on the second level in the clear story, but also directly on the front. That is both the wonderfully successful passive ventilation and lighting, but also allows pests and road dust to enter the building freely. The site is essentially unimproved or nearly unimproved, quote unquote, in 2007. This is it today, where there's been a great deal of gardening and hardening, I call it. Curbs, hedges, formalizing the gardens, introducing new plantings. And this is very purposeful to make the place more welcoming as a garden for people who come to commemorate here every April. In the 100 days of mourning, families will often come to these sites to stay for days, for even a week at a time. And so the sort of comfort level, increasing the comfort level and the support facilities, especially for those who are undergoing acute trauma as they come back to commemorate at the site, that's been a big driver of the need to improve the sites by hardening them and by introducing more buildings, which, as you can guess, introduces conservation issues. Here's one of the widened, the sort of separations in the plan and the ventilation that it introduces. From the rear garden, you can see the tower at the back, which is where the cross, it's a Catholic church, so the cross on the top, there it is. The mass grave structure was obviously included after 1994. They're typical on these sites, and they are basically concrete vaults into which human remains, sometimes openly stored and sometimes in coffins, are stored as a part of the proper burial of human remains, and can be visited by survivors or by outsiders. There's a terrible irony here as well, though, that part of another aspect of the site that I won't show you very much is the open display of human remains as direct evidence of the violence of the genocide. And so the tension between proper burial on one hand and open display on the other hand of the human remains is one of those kind of ambiguities that is essential to the place. So to the building itself and the conservation issues, the damage to the building in 1994 has been preserved quite well in the last 25 years. The story of Nyamata, briefly, is that people, when the genocide started happening, people were told to go to schools and churches and other civic buildings to be safe, but it was a trick, and people were just easier to slaughter when they gathered at these, especially these small churches. So people enclosed themselves inside the church, but the génocidaires, the mostly Hutu perpetrators of the genocide, used grenades and other weapons to breach the building and to move inside to do the killing. So you'll see bullet holes, mortar damage, things like that have all been very carefully retained in situ since 1994. This is the wall behind the altar, and you can see in the ceiling bullet holes have been retained in the metal roof, which was later covered by a fiberglass layer to prevent water infiltration. Has not quite worked, as you can see. There's several damaged bricks that are mostly damaged by gunshots, some of them damaged just by being poorly made. This is the front entrance to the church, the sanctuary, where the black gate was the original one that they've left damaged. The white one is the newer replacement. I always use this slide with students to show that some damage needs to be retained and some damage needs to be repaired. So the pest damage from the birds who basically live in the sanctuary needs to be remediated and removed, but not the bullet holes. This is a picture of the roof. The interior architecture as well is all retained with its damage. This is the tabernacle. An exterior wall, an interior elevation where one of the few pieces of reinforced concrete has been left damaged by gunshot wounds. It's not an immediate conservation issue, but it will be someday. So we did, working in a kind of triage mode, we did as much documentation and analysis as we needed to figure out our sort of top-level strategies, including documenting, quick documentation of existing conditions. Again, I want no time to belabor these, but really the overwhelming issue and in a lot of ways, the most significant fabric at the site of Niamata is the collection of textiles, which is enormous. And in an extremely powerful way, stands as silent witness to all the people who are gone. The clothes were collected and sorted in the immediate aftermath of the genocide. Human remains separated from the collections. The textiles were set back on the pews in the church to just sort of stand as witness. The structure that you see on the left, I won't try to explain. It was a post-genocide addition or subtraction to the building, creating an underground vault. But some of the extent of the textile collection meant that they were often just piled on the floor. This is the day chapel at the rear of the sanctuary. Close-up of some of the benches. The textiles are in very poor condition. These are the poorest condition, the ones that were on the floor or on the walls. Some of them deteriorated beyond repair. Many of them deteriorated beyond repair. There are a number of artifacts that are just left lying on the altar table. Rwandans keep adding to the collection, as it were. This is a letter to someone who was killed here by their relative, asking questions about if they can still see them. It's in Kinyarwanda and was translated for me, but a touching additional layer of commemoration. This is the vault underneath the sanctuary where Martin Muhoza and Laura Lacombe, my colleague, are putting in some RH monitors and temperature monitors. So we've tried to diagnose some of the main issues with the building. Some of them are very obvious. The birds that live in it that need to be kept out. The pests that come in. This is a pest trap that was just picked up after a couple of days. So lots of pest management issues as well. And then one of the big threats, most recent threats, was the strategy of quote unquote improving the site again to make it perform better for Rwandan survivors, but also for outside tourists. These were two plans: a first level at the top, and then a revision of engineering works at the site. And the only thing I'll point out is that you can see in the top there's a building right in the front of the sanctuary, and that would essentially block the view of the sanctuary. And we advised the Rwandans to modify the plan to push the new buildings off to the side so that it wouldn't affect the significance of the sanctuary and its collections or otherwise adversely affect them. Now I probably don't have a whole lot of time left, but I do want to talk about some of the details with the textile conservation. And again, with props to Julia Brennan, who really led the charge on this, and Michael Henry as well. As many of you probably know, one of his great points of expertise is managing the environments for collections. And this is essentially an unmanageable environment that we faced, but an extraordinarily large and difficult damaged collection. So we... Charlotte Caldwell, one of my young colleagues, managed to make this photograph of the whole extent of the textile collections as we found it. And our estimate is that it's 39 cubic meters. And the reference there is that a big shipping container is 40 cubic meters. So this is an enormous amount of material. Some unknown part of it so damaged that it's really unrecognizable as textile. And so the first level of triage that we did, and this is Julia working with Martin to do some of the initial sorting of the day chapel textiles, which was our pilot project, is to separate out the collection damaged beyond repair from those that are still recognizably textiles, and then treat them both with different passive, essentially, non-chemical treatments for a number of different reasons. There were some serious constraints to what kinds of interventions we could suggest or pilot. On the one hand, there is a great number of these textiles. On the second hand, there are very significantly damaged. On the third, they can't be cleaned, because if they were cleaned, they would no longer be evidence of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. The damage and the soiling of various kinds that are part of the collection are part of its value, and by Rwandan policy, by CNLJ decision, they can't be cleaned. That, of course, sustains a lot of the deterioration mechanisms. So we created a way to essentially partially clean them without using any chemicals or liquids to try to extend the life of the collections. You might say, well, why didn't we just take it off site and put it in a controlled storage? That is also precluded by Rwandan policy. The collections must stay on the site. There are no facilities, technically or otherwise, to create a controlled environment on the site. And if we decided to try to control the building, that would create untold other problems that would be difficult to solve and extraordinarily expensive. So with all these constraints in mind, Julia and the rest of the team created a protocol for sorting the material first, for separating it into essentially two different streams. In the course of doing that, you'll see on the right that Martin is removing some human remains that are still part of this collection and have to be carefully removed and put into the mass grave structures. This is the day chapel, about halfway processed. The two kinds of material are put into plastic bins. And you can see our Rwandan colleagues working in the back. In order to reduce the relative humidity, they're put in sealed bins with zeolites that are adapted from an agricultural company to reduce the relative humidity very quickly and very dramatically, and also in a low-tech way. We also have an oven that we use to recharge the beads. So this is a very sustainable system that the Rwandans can obtain the materials and keep using them. You can see in the upper left, putting the zeolites in the bin of sealed, before it being sealed, sealing it with tape. And what you see at the bottom are taking some of the untreated collections to the facility for cleaning that we had to construct on the site. If you see on the right, all the bins outside, there's no other space on the site where we could do this work protected from weather, and it rains a lot in equatorial Rwanda. So we essentially had to create a building. This is a building that we designed and had constructed to accommodate storage, but also, more importantly, to accommodate this machine that we had designed that essentially rotated in a drum as gently as we could, collections one bin at a time, so that the artifacts and human remains and other large pieces of soiled material would fall to the bottom and could be collected and stored elsewhere. The gently cleaned, still recognizable collections were then put in these, so let me go back one, put in these specially built frames, screen frames, that were then vacuumed by the team. And there's Julia in the background and three of our Rwandan colleagues. They would be gently vacuumed so as to not damage them, and then put in the drying beads, and eventually they would have to go back on display. I should have mentioned before that another of the constraints is that the collections have to go back on display in the same mode that we found them. In other words, in this relatively chaotic sort of mass of piles of clothes. That is there's no other way to do it according to the Rwandan desires. So the day chapel that again was our pilot project looked like this just as we started. And there's Julia Brennan on the right and our colleague Julia Griffith on the left. And this is what it looked like when we finished. 10 days later, this is an interim display in which we constructed these metal platforms to keep the clothes up off the floor, redisplayed some of the gently cleaned, recognizable clothes, and have on display for didactic purposes to let people know what we were doing and why some of the collections had gone off of display, some of the bins with the zeolites in them. And this is essentially the state that we are now. There's so much work to be done that even though we left the Rwandans with supplies and time to do it over the last 12 to 18 months, they're still only about halfway through the collection. At the end of the project, Julia on the left, Martin Muhoza on the right, explained the project to the American ambassador, Erica Barks-Ruggles, you see there in the center, as well as the leader of CNLJ, Dr. Bizimana, who's the man in the red tie in the center. And the last thing I'll say, I'm sure I've covered this in such a quick way that there'll be tons of questions, especially about the technical aspects of it. The last 5 minutes, thank you, Nan. The last thing I'll say about the specific work at Nyamata has to do with this modest building. Does anybody know what it is? Yeah, latrine. But it's an original latrine. And one of the kind of delights of this project was that the improvement, the engineers planned to come and basically demolish a lot of the site and build new versions of for instance, toilets, an office building, a trauma center, a guardhouse, things like that. They were going to tear this down. But Martin, newly armed with the Borough Charter and cultural significance, and his personal force of will and charm and intelligence, got them to not touch the latrine. It's sealed so that it's no longer used, but it's original to the site. It is a witness to the genocide, as other parts of the site are. It, too, was a site of violence in its own way. And I think this was a decision that I think reflected the time that our team and his team had spent together. And I think, at least one small bit of success in our training effort to try to instill and inspire and enable our Rwandan colleagues to do more with what they already have, as well as to help them literally hand to hand when we're there. So in the last couple of minutes, to some of the larger issues and research questions, I fully admit that I haven't written anything about this yet. As I said, it's still a work in progress, so that is still to come. Our team is aiming to write about the technical work that we're in the midst of doing, and we'll be evaluating round one come early 2019. But in the absence of anything formally done, there are just 4 points I wanted to kind of throw out, maybe for later discussion or as coming attractions. One has to do with our role as outsiders and quote-unquote experts vis-a-vis Martin and the team at CNLJ. We're about trying to move Rwandans towards sustainable practices as they define them and as they can manage them and as they can sustain on themselves. Cognizant of the fact at the same time that Rwandan society is very dynamic and changing a great deal. These sites will continue to change a great deal. And the other thing that will change a great deal is that soon there will be no survivors from 1994. The generational change that is not very far away really are going to demand different things of these sites. And we're trying to create a kind of partnership where we work in different ways at different times, sometimes as advisor, sometimes as expert, sometimes as kind of nitpicker, sometimes as the memo writer to the politician, but more of the time as colleague and friend and empathetic colleague to try to, again, sort of break down the barriers that usually come with notions of expertise and international best practice and so forth. And one of the things that I've learned a great deal from Martin and the other Rwandans, and one could say I should have learned this a lot sooner or should have learned it in Philadelphia, is that when we work on these projects, especially for a long time, they're not just about them, they're about us. And they're not just about you, they're also about me. And so finding the different ways in which we sort of take our roles vis-a-vis one another, I think has been one of the really kind of important lessons and sort of ethical and philosophical points for me, and I think for my team, although I'm not speaking for them. Secondly, there is a really pointed and difficult political issue that is being very actively debated in lots of places, but I won't debate it here, just note it. President Kagame was essentially the military and political hero who stopped the genocide. This is the consensus account. He came out of exile in Uganda. His army, the RPF, Rwandan Patriotic Force, stopped the Hutu. The Genocidaire mostly fled to Congo, where they continued to mostly live. And Kagame became president after a time. He's been president now he's in his third term. For those of you who are New Yorkers, I sometimes use the joke, and it's not a project for jokes, but he pulled a Bloomberg. You remember Mike Bloomberg got the law changed so he could run a third time. So President Kagame has done this, and so he will serve as long as he wishes. The scripting of, or the narrative about the genocide as the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda is the dominant political narrative, but there are others. For instance, there is significant evidence that Hutu were not all perpetrators. Some of them were killed as well, especially quote-unquote moderate Hutus who refused to do the killing that the Hutu leaders insisted they do. That nuance is not allowed in the dominant narrative of the government. And in fact, there are significant accounts. These are mainstream media, the BBC and the New Times, which is essentially the government newspaper. The Human Rights Watch and other activists and journalists have documented what they have presented as evidence of political torture and political killings and other kinds of political discrimination and violence to maintain the regime. And the narrative of the genocide and the memorials that support it are part of that political story. So we're very conscious that we can't be innocent of these drivers, but we also don't have the wherewithal to kind of make a decision and debate about it. I say there is a lot of debate about it. There are lots of easy opportunities for grandstanding and saying that you shouldn't touch those because that makes you politically complicit. I think understanding the everyday lives and struggles of the Rwandans I've come to meet is much more compelling to me than being labeled to be on the politically wrong side of things. The last thing I'll say about this is that I was recently told about this really, I think, telling metaphor for the kind of perils of political purity or arguing for political purity. The Rwandan said, our country was broken in 1994, like an arm gets broken, and then we put it in a cast, and we're maybe now just taking off the cast, and we're not quite ready yet to have like the full function of that limb. So you have to give us time to be able to talk about this incredibly significant traumatic event with more nuance. So it's easy for us here to talk about the nuances, not so much there. The other big change coming, by the way, is more development. This is the airport that's going in that puts Nyamata between the airport and the capital. It's going to bring a lot more people and a lot more tourists. The third of the four issues I wanted to briefly mention is cultural landscape theory, which is something that's really important to me personally, having been first educated as a geographer, to be able to understand the connectedness of a whole place and how a whole territory works, as opposed to how individual sites work as sort of cordoned off from the rest of the territory, I think is a really important distinction. We can talk about it theoretically, but heritage practices are very much devoted to creating isolated individual sites, and fixing them and hardening them, and not having them be part of the ebb and flow of the whole landscape. That leaves aside some really important sites and experiences of the genocide in Rwanda, including this bridge, or this was once the pylons for a bridge, where many Rwandans were killed by being thrown off this bridge. It's now just sort of falling down in the middle of the river. This was a site that a local colleague told us was the place where women and children would every day go down to the marshes, from the hills down to the marshes to hide during the day, and come back up from the marshes up to the hills at night to try to forage and eat. So this was part of this sort of daily experience. It was really experienced as a landscape, not as the interior of a building to the Rwandans. And so if we don't manage to protect any of the landscape markers of this experience, then it's going to be compressed and into these sort of more narrow frames of individual buildings and museum cases. Lastly, this is called an umuvumu tree. It's a kind of ficus tree that were planted every time somebody found a house in the Bugesera. So these are all over the place, but the houses are all gone. Because they were destroyed in the genocide. But these are the markers of when the Tutsi were first exiled to this region. These were the places that they made a home in this really kind of uncomfortable and unforgiving part of the country. So they're actually really important landscape markers, and this is what's happening to them. They are being threatened and constrained and sort of choked off by these new concrete trails being put into the site. So we're working really hard to try to push back on things like this and to point out the conservation implications of hardening the sites in this ways. Finally, this notion of traumatic heritage places, I think the argument for these as a type of sites that challenge our practices rests on two things. One, this idea that every site works as both an archive and an agent for social change. Usually the agency is something we just leave for somebody else to worry about. It's kind of a black box. If we preserve this, then it will help people think about this other issue. With traumatic heritage places, part of the work of conservation is actively trying to get people to think differently and act differently. And I think that this is maybe a qualitative difference, but a really important one. In terms of values-based preservation, which I've spilled a lot of ink trying to explain to myself and others over my career, I think this amounts to admitting that there's another type of value that actually is loosely connected to sites, but very important to society at large. So I call them societal values. And there's more to come on that front. There'll be an article about this in a forthcoming book that the Getty is publishing in next year. But again, I think that there are real analogies between the functions in contemporary society of Rwandan genocide memorials and sites that we're much more familiar with, like the 9/11 memorials, Flight 93 in particular, and Eastern State Penitentiary, as I hazard to say anything about it because Sally sits right before me. But the way in which Eastern State has not only embraced conservation and embraced social values based in the site, but also taken on societal issues and really tried to change people's mind in a gentle and balanced way. But unmistakably balanced way. So the last thing I'll say is to go find some of the artwork of this guy named Alfredo Yar. If some of you already might know him, he's a Chilean artist who traveled to Rwanda right after the genocide in 1994 and did about 10 or 12 different pieces, sort of performance and conceptual art on Rwanda. One of the most powerful ones he did, and the one that really sort of stopped me in my tracks, was when he went to Narama, one of the sites that I've worked on. He made this little drawing at the bottom and then took a picture of the cloud in recognition of the fact that what he had witnessed at this site, with all still in sort of the chaos of October 1994, was so profound and so disturbing that he couldn't represent it. He couldn't just take a picture of it and couldn't just have that kind of stand for itself. And to me, this is I think a very sort of concrete illustration, if you will, of this notion that as immediate and as disturbing and as graphic as some of these stories are with these sites, there's something about the creation of heritage that is supposed to last for a very long time that seems a little bit like nailing jelly to the wall, or a little bit like a cloud that's just going to sort of keep morphing and floating and changing on its own, and we can see it and we can interpret it, but we really can't do much with it. So that's that's what I think in my more cynical moments. In my more positive moments, I think about these guys, and the little girl in the middle is saying, "See ya." So, see ya.
This works. Hello? So I am, as a family of Holocaust survivors, I've spent a lot of time considering how we're going to tell the story when the survivors no longer exist. So I am actually happy that they've made a decision to represent their memorial while they're still around to tell the story. I know it'll change over time as the story changes. So my question is less philosophical about the decision to tell the story and a little more technical. So they've made the decision to gently clean the clothes, and honestly, for authenticity, that's great. But has there been any discussion about whether this means it's a short-term decision and there's going to need to be another intervention, or it's no longer going to be a representation?
Yes, great question, and a very important question that I skipped over. So part of our advice to CNLJ is that a certain percentage, let's say for the sake of argument, 20% of the collection, should be taken off site and put in controlled environment in Kigali where it exists. That there is an archive that at the Kigali Genocide Memorial, there is an archive. So there's a facility that could do it. And they said, we're not going to do that. It's our policy that everything has to stay on the site. Part of that policy is driven by survivors coming back to the site every year and multiple times during the year, whenever they want to. And whether it is quote-unquote true or not, they find the clothes of their family. So they have that connection to the site can't be compromised, even at the cost of, and we've been very clear with them that if nothing is done, the collection will be gone in 20 years, if that. So we proposed it and we're told no, and we propose it again, and we put it in the plan, and we put it in our reports, so it's there, and we'll keep gently putting it on the table. And I think our suspicion, and I think Julia's belief, is that as they see the conditions of the most deteriorated parts of this collection, they'll realize that that's actually a better idea. So we hope in the fullness of time that they will take up that advice.
Thank you. I'll be brave. I'll wager, I'm an architect, and I think about half of this room are architects, and when you use the word material culture, I think all of us can really understand, and our whole careers have been based on tangible objects. And I think the question raised just now was really, really pertinent, and that is, you happen to use the word sustainable, and I think you were talking fairly narrowly for this one facility, but I think you set the stage for the big picture quantity of the memorials in Rwanda. If this is only one of what will be 8 national sites, but you said maybe there are 20 or 30 other sites, is the treatment and the steps you're taking, is it really sustainable for the entire picture of the issue in Rwanda? And I would doubt the answer is yes, from a financial point of view or anything else. And the second thing, if your treatment of these textile objects might have a 20-year lifespan, I don't think any of us would adopt that as a reasonable treatment. So I think you explained what all of your programs were, but I don't think you justified, and I think you need to focus on the really justification of how you have taken your opinions of what ought to be done, and it seems like you've imposed your opinions in a situation that maybe there's really a mismatch. It's kind of like going like this.
Okay.
So I've made several points. You can take that one.
I think you'll have to wait for the book to have all the answers to all those questions. But very briefly, we actually have a very broad concept of sustainability that not only means the material itself, a material culture, as you say, but also the ability to marshal the human, financial, and material resources to do this work at all. We have a very clear sense that sustainability is not an end state that you achieve and then you're done and you go home. It's a matter of more or less. So we think we're very, very confident that the recommendations we've made and the pilots that we've done have increased the sustainability of this collection. By reducing the pace and some of the kinds of deterioration, extending the life of some of the materials as a first measure, undoubtedly there will need to be other measures to truly make this a sustainable strategy for conserving the whole textile collection at Neomata. No question about that. We don't claim to have solved the problem. We only claim to have engaged in it and tried to improve the situation in a way that is sustainable in all those senses of the word. I often default to David Throsby, the cultural economist's definition of sustainability, which is an exceedingly broad one. The other thing that you mentioned was about, one other thing about the sustainability. One of the reasons that we built a temporary building and with demountable gear, like the tumbler and all of the other gear, is mobile. And it's all designed to fit in the back of a Toyota Hilux, which is the kind of truck that everybody has in Rwanda, purposefully, so that when the collection at Neomata is processed, the gear can be taken to the next site, because all of the sites have textile collections, albeit much smaller than Neomata. So we absolutely intend for this to be used at other sites. Certainly the 8 national memorials, and if and as there are resources to do it at lower level memorials, absolutely. But the national strategy has been to centralize collections at the 8 national sites. So we feel like that is an achievable result, as long as as long as it doesn't depend on us. We give them a protocol and materials and a way to monitor and measure progress, and they're the ones who are responsible for marshaling the resources to get it done. So that began happening as soon as we left last July. July a year ago, Martin and his staff continued to process materials. So I would respectfully say I think we have done taken good incremental steps toward the sustainability of the conservation measures. About the expert culture and us imposing views on them, we should have a drink and talk about that.
I guess up next, is this on? Yeah, okay. So first of all, thank you for a really interesting and provocative presentation. You said that the purpose of these things is to change people's minds. So my question is, whose minds? And how many people are coming? And looking to the long term, who's expected to come?
Principally, these places exist for survivors, Rwandans who are survivors of 1994. Secondly, they are meant to be sites where Rwandan school children are brought routinely for genocide education programs. And the CNLG, the same organization that manages memorial sites, also manages genocide education, which every Rwandan school child is given. They also managed a process. There was a process of peace and reconciliation process called the Gacaca Courts that went on for about 10 years. They've transcribed every page, 1 million pages of testimony and making that available on the web. So there are all these multiple ways of defining and enforcing a certain way to remember the genocide for Rwandans in a way that is very clearly and directly multi-generational, cross-generational. So that's first and foremost. The other reality, the kind of sneaking reality I think that's happening right now, and this refers back to the airport, is that increasing numbers of outsiders, you and me, are already going to Rwanda. Why do people go to Rwanda these days? How many of you have been to Rwanda? I can't see you, sorry. Gorillas.
Yeah, gorillas.
To be close to the gorillas. That's a very important part of Rwandan tourism economy at the moment. So people do go and visit the memorial in Kigali, but increasingly they will also go to these ones that are further afield. And that's why you see parking spaces and better toilets and things like that become a more important part of how they're improving and changing these sites. So they're getting ready for that. Will they be ready for that when it happens, when the airport opens? I doubt it. That's going to take more than just changes at a site. That's going to relate to town planning and other kinds of infrastructure issues as well. So we hope to work with them on that someday as well.
Randy, thank you very much for your...
I can't see who's talking.
Way at the back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very powerful and moving and, as usual, articulate presentation. I also want to talk about outsiders, but from a different perspective. Obviously, your work is very much about Rwandans in Rwanda, as it should be, and that's totally appreciated. I think at the end of the day, there's lessons for the wider world that at some point will need to be learned as well. And I was just wondering to what extent that became part of your process, if at all. So, for example, the United Nations had General Dallaire, Romeo Dallaire there, or any other aspect of the sort of international complexities of the situation.
I hope I'm not misinterpreting your question, but I think it's a question about how you deal with guilt, or how I deal with guilt. And there is a very well documented series of events by which our country decided not to intervene, even though they knew full well what was going on in 1994. That has, I think, a lot to do with the fact that we've gotten 2 State Department grants to work on this. That the American government realized its mistake. Clinton admitted as much. And so there is a fair amount of trying to, I can't make up for something like that, but to recognize that we need to be a force for good in Rwanda and not just wash our hands of it. So there are many American organizations, including our government, still, that have been a very robust partner to Rwandan government, Rwandan companies, individual Rwandans, even the most disadvantaged folks who live far out in the countryside and are the kind of most traumatized survivors. Our country has done a lot to try to lift up Rwandans. So I regard our effort as part of that. I can't change Rwandan society, but I feel like I can, use whatever expertise or influence I have from outside to help them take more control of this aspect of their culture and society, so that they can, use it and deploy it and use heritage in whatever way that they see fit. That is what we do with heritage. We use it for various ends. So I see, I think we can play a role as an enabler to more and better heritage conservation, to more and better economic development, to more and better public health outcomes. And so I see us as kind of parallel to those other kinds of concerns that have been very, very clear improvements to the country.
We have time for one more question. Anybody? You
get to ask the last question of the evening. Hi, Randy. It's Sharon Park from the Smithsonian.
Hi, Sharon.
And I almost feel silly asking this question because it's a technical question of tangible heritage when we're really talking about intangible heritage. But for the exhibit of the fabric and the clothing, what is the climate area within? I mean, what did Michael Henry find when he was studying? Is the piling of the clothing going to have a humidity issue and accelerate the deterioration of the fabric, or require it to be put in the spinner more often? What's happening with that interior climate and the piling of the clothes as opposed to putting them on screens or something where they would get more ventilation?
Great question. I'll try to be really quick and say that the three most urgent vectors of deterioration were humidity, pests, and the soiling. So with the soiling, we did that kind of half cleaning process where there's no wet washing, no chemical washing, but just trying to reduce the amount of dirt and organic material that's mixed up with the clothes. On the humidity, we lifted them up off the floor to create air circulation. We reduced the size of the piles. When the pews, so that was the platforms that you saw on one of the very last slides in the day chapel. There were bins and clothes piled on platforms. They were basically like bed platforms that we had fabricated. When the pews are rebuilt, when the clothes are taken off the pews to be half cleaned, they'll be rebuilding the pews in a way that reduces the depth of the piles and introduces a kind of a mesh tube that allows air to circulate better. So those two things were, again, sort of improvements to the situation, but not total solutions. Sorry, on pests. So we've gotten them to introduce bird screens to exclude the birds through those concrete costras, but the birds still come out. This is actually a really interesting technical question, interpretive question. At the margin of the roof on both sides of the sanctuary, there's a very thin, maybe 3 or 4 inch gap. And you might say that was a real big mistake because the birds can get in, birds can nest. But it was one of Jobin's references to Corbusier. It's right out of the chapel at Ronchamp. So we need to make and Michael has already figured out the design of this, a bird protection device that goes up on top of the wall to prevent it there. So we partly implemented pest control measures, but not fully yet. So we've made progress on all fronts, but it's incremental.
Right. Thank you.